Over here. I want to show you something. Come on, closer. That's it. You're going to love this.
Cyberspace is full of seductive messages. The techno-evangelists promise to make us richer, cleverer, more creative. Information can be yours at the click of a mouse. You can even become part of a virtual community.
Ready? Now look directly at the camera, okay? 1, 2, 3, smile. You look marvelous.
You can use the internet to create electronic music, paint electronic pictures and send them across the world in an instant. Everybody can become an artist for an audience of millions. Traditional culture will die away, paintings in a gallery, music on the stage. Anything seems possible in the new world of cyberspace.
Computer art, in some ways, could actually liberate modern art and actually take it and push it in a new direction. I'm a child that is bridging, maybe between a new culture and an old. You know, I've been brought up with a lot of old conventional rubbish that is clogging me up, stuff that is slowing me down, stuff like rock and roll, stuff like performance.
As the old culture is transformed by computer technology, there's a new breed of wired artists emerging. This program looks at what they're doing with interactive media to create Electroculture. Electroculture is art with an edge. It's art about our lives in a future wired world, using images that are unfamiliar and often confusing. How we deal with these ideas on the road to the future is crucially important.
There are a lot of analogies that people are using about the future, and of course the superhighway is perhaps the most common analogy. And I've heard it said that on the road to the future, there's perhaps three kinds of people. There are those that are driving, there are those that are passengers, and there are those that are roadkill. And it reminds me an awful lot of Richard Adams' book, Watership Down. And you'll remember in there he describes how small animals, rabbits in this case, get caught in the headlights of automobiles and they freeze. And he uses the term tharn to describe this process. And he suggests that quite often the animals die without ever being hit. They simply die from fear, from anticipation of what might happen to them by the lights and the confusion. And I do worry that so many people are caught in the lights of the future.
People still don't realize that technology is a two-way street. That every wire coming into their homes is not just a way for some big brother to monitor them or their buying habits or behaviors, but it's a way for them to monitor everything else that's going on in the world. And as soon as people start to see technology as an extension of who they are, rather than just an extension of who them is, you know, they'll have a very different feeling toward it.
Most writers couldn't do without the new technology, but a lot of them had their initial doubts about how it could help them creatively. Authors like Douglas Adams.
The reason I couldn't see any way that a computer could possibly be of use to a writer is that I misunderstood what a computer was. But luckily, I mean, I wasn't alone. I mean, the whole of the rest of the world misunderstood what a computer was, in that we all thought it was an adding machine. And after a while, because we're able to manipulate these numbers with increasing speed and sophistication, we think, well, what else can these numbers stand for? Maybe they can stand for the letters of the alphabet. And so we suddenly think, oh God, how stupid we were, how lacking in imagination we were to think that this is just an adding machine. What it is, it's a typewriter. So we develop it for a while as a typewriter, and then we think, well, hang on, whilst we're at it, what else can we make these numbers for? Like the elements of a graphic display, the pixels. And so we think, good heavens, we shouldn't be restricted in thinking of it as a typewriter. It's a television with a typewriter stuck in front of it. Now, of course, with the World Wide Web, we've got a whole new paradigm, which is think of it, it's a brochure. It's a brochure.
Hang on a minute, Douglas. What is the World Wide Web?
For people who are not familiar with what the World Wide Web is, imagine this science fiction device that in the middle of a landscape you've got a door standing there. You can walk up to that door, and as you walk through it, you're suddenly in a different place. And the new place you walk into, there are lots of other doors, and you can walk through any of those doors and you get to another place in the world. Now imagine also that on each of these doors are pinned pictures, notices, tape cassettes, and anything you want, you can be sort of pinned to that door. And those doors sort of connect, as it were, through hyperspace to anywhere else in the world. So you walk through one door and you emerge out of another door, which is 5,000 miles away.
So my computer's like the key to the door. Plug it into a phone line, and I'm all set to surf the net. The internet was conceived as a North American military network in the 1960s to keep information out of the hands of the enemy in case of a nuclear war. Now there are about 100,000 websites on the internet, each with their own unique address. They link you into anything and everything. It was first used as a research tool, but as more and more people got personal computers in the late 80s, this web of information became available to an ever-increasing number. Now there are 40 million people using the internet in 150 countries. By the year 2000, over 200 million will be wired up. For the advertisers of the future, internet users represent a lucrative market, and companies are rushing to create websites targeted at these wired consumers. This is the design office of Organic Online in California. It's helped to create a new website for Levi Strauss & Company, which offers a mass of information about youth culture to hook young internet surfers.
I think that the most exciting part of the Levi's site is how it dealt with content. Rather than it just being a corporate brochure on the web, they really tried to target market the individuals that would be buying the products. So there's a lot of content about DJs, there's content about people, young people in the scene, the underground fashion, that kind of thing. So I think it makes it more exciting for someone to want to come in here rather than just have, the jeans, here's the jeans, and that's it. We're looking at information in a totally different way now. Information on demand is a pretty serious tool. And I think that people are going to be better for it. If people are interested in educating themselves, this is the way to do it. Go out and find the information that you're looking for.
Location is no longer, physical location, is no longer any inhibition to the gathering of knowledge. You can sit in the Western Isles in a public library and quite theoretically, and not just theoretically, absolutely practically, go into the Smithsonian and borrow a file in Washington, or check with the museum in Calcutta as on the origins of the Bengali language. There is no natural or physical limit to the information gathering process on either the most simple level or the most complex and detailed level, and that has to be a phenomenal asset.
So it's a massive global 24-hour library of information. But what's different about it is everybody on the net can communicate with each other as well as just browsing on their own. The internet is different from the mainstream media, television and newspapers. Instead of just getting what one channel or one newspaper wants to tell you, you can have access to what thousands of people around the world on the net have to say.
The mainstream media, probably even the very channel we're being broadcast on now, is the enemy of the internet. It's the enemy of cyberspace. It's the enemy of do-it-yourself home media. Because the way, especially television newsmakers, be they the old William Randolph Hearsts or today's Rupert Murdochs, the way they traditionally have maintained their empires is by maintaining control over the content of media.
You're going to see the breakdown of centralized control of publishing, of broadcasting. The balance of power goes to the creative individual, who now doesn't have to go through some centralized process that decides about the value of their work. The marketplace will decide about the value of your work.
Well, if you take musicians as an example, one of the problems that young musicians have always had is communicating their wares, and if they don't get Radio 1 or Virgin Radio or the other radio stations to play their product, they don't get heard and nobody knows about them. So having another outlet like the internet, where they can get their message across to millions of people, gives them a chance to bypass the sort of conventional way of getting known.
One group of musicians taking advantage of the new technologies is the Future Sound of London. From their studio, they transmit music and images down high-speed ISDN lines. They are followed by fans around the world on the internet. They're a band, pirate radio station, and TV channel rolled into one, and they don't fit neatly into the dreaded mainstream media. Their visuals are an amazing mix of graphics, film and computer images edited together in a psychedelic collage.
I view the art that we make as being an awkward shape, and I actually like that fact. It's awkward because it is not readily consumable by medias which I think have become increasingly lazy. Radio, in the way that it programs music, has become very lazy. Television's become lazy in the way it uses music, and so has the music industry. So basically, I have to become very creative about the ways that I want to spread it to people. And this is where our philosophy has come from. It is completely me being forced to. If I could just be lazy and just do something and everybody loved it, believe you me, I would. The fact of the matter is, I do things and radio says to me, well, I can't use them because your music won't work on my radio station. So therefore, what we do is we create our own radio shows. And then from that, we began to actually broadcast the radio shows from this studio in Dollis Hill. And from that, the whole philosophy came together, that we can be this little self-contained unit which is beaming out to millions of people across the world. I grew up with very conventional forms of entertainment. The forms of entertainment that really had an effect on me as a child were conventional rock and roll performances, conventional television and radio. I'm a child that is bridging maybe between a new culture and an old. I've been brought up with a lot of old conventional rubbish that is clogging me up, stuff that is slowing me down, stuff like rock and roll, stuff like performance. The first creative landmark for me really was coming across samplers. Having done conventional music for years, to come across such a radically different way of putting music together was obviously something I jumped immediately into with relish. And that consequently affected the whole music industry across the world, to the point where people, for the first time I think, could make music without people saying yes or no. And that was very important, because the yes or no men had become very important in terms of running the big studios, etc., etc. The second piece was undoubtedly the Apple Mac computer. The way that you can input and output information into that makes it a modern-day microscope. I want to say yes, that I've been empowered by all the technology, and undoubtedly I have, but in doing that I'm also aware of the fact that I'm feeding into people's hands that believe that my creativity is entirely born out of machines, because I do view machines very much as a canvas for my ideas and the way that I input them. There is countless thousands of people using these medias now, and I think they're becoming sophisticated enough whereby we can work out what's good and bad.
Cyberspace connects musicians with their fans and writers with their readers. Douglas Rushkoff is well into email, electronic mail to you and me.
Well, technology has helped me in two ways. You know, technology has a sort of surface, topical way that it helps us work. And that's very real, but it's limited. You know, having email is a great thing because people who read my books email me. I get 50 or 100 emails a day from people who've read something or seen something like this show on TV, and they go, "Oh, what were you saying?" And they can talk back to me. And while that's great for them, you know, to be able to talk to me directly and have me answer them or try to defend myself against their usually very correct arguments, it's great for me because I have the benefit now of, you know, thousands of other minds who are commenting on my stuff rather than just 20 reviewers at the top papers who I'm supposed to respect. I can talk to real people and see how the things I say or do are hitting them, find out where I'm wrong, and correct myself for next time. You know, so that's great. And online conversations, these conferences and bulletin boards are all very exciting in that I can find out about stuff I don't know. If I have a question, if I'm writing, rather than going to the library and trying to find what's already been said, I can go out and find what are people thinking right now about this, and that's fascinating.
Next up on the internet, Dr. Fiorella Terenzi, astrophysicist, performer, and publisher.
The World Wide Web is an extremely important medium because finally I can give you an idea how does it look the universe outside, but how does it look the universe made by music. Near-Earth object.
The raw material for her music is created from signals received from distant galaxies by radio telescopes. She converts these sounds using special computer software.
A sound synthesis language is able to take radio waves from celestial object and transforming the radio waves into sound like an acoustic signature of celestial object. The sound is then saved on different medium, like, you know, a DAT or a CD or like floppy. And with the floppy, I usually take my sound in my sampler, load my floppy in order to be able to play with my radio astronomical data directly from my keyboard. And at this point, finally, you can listen. How does it sound, these radio waves from 180 million light years away? It's very simple. You have the galaxy on a different key, and this is an example. With my music background, I was captured by the tonality and the microtonality of this galactic sound. I think it's very important to popularize science, have fun with it, dance with it. The way I do it, I show you. You know, the femininity in science and technology is an extremely important factor, and we don't have to hide that. I mean, I cannot hide the fact that I'm a woman. Therefore, you know, the cyberspace was also the element that helped me to encounter and exploit my femininity. I mean, I think everything comes down to the big possibility we have to reinvent also our way to approach life. And I think, you know, technology in the web, CD-ROM, interactivity give us a new way to explore what does it mean to be a human being.
The internet and interactive media is really remedial help for a culture that's lost the ability to communicate with itself, to love itself, to touch itself. And it looks kind of funny now, and it's probably just an intermediate stage. You know, it might be like braces on the teeth, that it's something we do to convince ourselves that we're one civilization, that we're one organism, and that once we realize, oh, we're one thing, we can just shed that off and be that way.
The last time we had this one-world feeling was when the first astronauts photographed the Earth from space. An amazing new view of the planet as a fragile, spinning blue ball. Now we see the world as a network of information, a bundle of ever-changing messages. In Berlin, software designers and artists have designed a system called TerraVision to make plugging into it even easier. The idea behind TerraVision is to show all kinds of information based on highly detailed satellite pictures about cities, people, even the weather, and to use this globe to find your way around it. Like linking an encyclopedia to an atlas. They're putting it in art galleries, libraries, and museums around the world. Shift the globe to a particular area of the planet, zoom in on a city, then enlarge that to a specific street, and you fly in through the window of an office in that street and take a look around. Right now, it's just a prototype, but the more people create information and pictures about different parts of the world, the more comprehensive it will be. The amount of data you can put into the system is limitless. So far, the designers have produced this 3D model of Berlin for you to explore. It'll even let you see what a particular area used to look like.
The idea was to make a virtual model of our world, a virtual planet. But the important thing wasn't this image as such. We really wanted to develop this virtual Earth as an interface, a sort of backdrop, to display local information for each area. This information would include, for example, the weather, ecological data, sociological data, political data, and so on. We wanted to create a sort of virtual world on which the information could be powerfully visualized.
TerraVision shows people are thinking globally, encouraging us to find out about and communicate with other countries and their cultures. For them, knowledge is what makes the world go round. But whether this information on demand is something that makes us understand the world any better, and exactly who that information is for, is something that a lot of the critics of cyberspace are concerned about.
The current line, if you listen to those who are truly enamored of the new technologies, is really, it shows a level of hyperbole that is hard to find anywhere else. If you listen, let's say, to Vice President Al Gore here, you know, it sounds as though he's delivering a millennial sermon or a declaration of war. It has this amazing fervor behind it. Cyberspace will make us healthy, wealthy, and wise. It will, hamstring the tyrants of the world, and it will empower the weak. I'm skeptical, to say the least. First of all, cyberspace is an issue for a tiny minority. The average person really using the technologies is probably a white male like myself, sitting on a plane somewhere tapping on a laptop. In fact, there's an entire universe of issues outside this little tiny elite community, which are completely untouched. AT&T is putting a cable around the entire continent of Africa, but at the same time that they're doing that, people are massacring each other with machetes in Rwanda. These are the things that the techno-evangelists seem strikingly uninterested in. They're saving us in some way, but they haven't quite explained to us how, unless they really believe that we're going to somehow, ascend in some Star Trek-y way, into the vapor. And they have made that argument. Until that happens, we're stuck with the physical world.
In countries like India, The basic problem is about creating a telephone network for an exploding economy, to make the leap to the world of the information haves from that of the information have-nots. Sam Petroda, who was advisor on technology to Rajiv Gandhi, knows that cyberspace threatens to swamp Indian culture with Western values. But he also knows that India has to get wired up and join the global electronic village.
Without telecom, you're not going to be able to expedite the process of modernization. Unfortunately, people still think of telecom as something urban. Like you asked, why should India be wired up? I think India can only progress after you wire it up properly. Otherwise, the pace of growth is not going to be acceptable. Today, in this world, for 5.6 billion people, we have 600 million telephones. 85% of these telephones are in advanced countries of the world. 4 billion people have no access to telephones at all. So a whole lot of cultural things change as you begin to bring in this modern technology. Some changes are visible, other changes are not very visible, but they're very subtle and very fundamental. I think in the process of connecting people, we have disconnected human beings. A child in America today may be playing with computers all day long and may be very good, sometimes has problems playing with kids next door. So I think at times we carry this technology too far, and we have to be very careful. People in India are watching TV all day because they have nothing else to do. What are they watching? Is it really of value to them? Is it really increasing their aspirations to a point they also want same kind of lifestyle without working? They want the soap and shampoo and all the stuff that is advertised, and they think it's easy to get. So there are a whole lot of issues here. And I think any technology has good sides and bad sides. See, over a period of time, I believe globalization of telecom is going to bring about some amount of global culture. There is nothing wrong in having some sort of cross-cultural breeding. Americans will learn a little bit about India and practice some Indian, culture, and Indians will practice some Western culture. So you will see a sort of global culture evolve, but in the process you have to make sure that your culture don't get hijacked.
These villages near Delhi are welcoming a holy man who's about to read from ancient Sanskrit manuscripts, part of the day-to-day religious life of India. There's a huge debate in the country about whether Western media, Hollywood films, satellite TV, and now the internet is threatening their culture, and whether traditions like this are on the way out. At the Jiva Institute nearby, they're trying to use the internet in a positive way to store and communicate these traditions. They've got about 2,000 manuscripts written on tree bark. They're hundreds of years old and too fragile to be handled, so the Institute is using a computer to scan and store them. In their new digital form, they're put onto the Institute's website on the internet, translated into English, and available to anyone who wants to read them. This school is also part of the Jiva Institute and has got all the trappings of cyberspace. Computers and the internet are part of the kids' education, and they seem totally at home on them. They can even call up their own cyber pen pals at a school in Japan, nearly 4,000 miles away. Every day, they log onto the net and exchange emails. Cyberspace in action on a global scale. Across the Pacific in Tokyo, their pen pals at the Shino Elementary School are also getting wired up with their own website and a computer for every kid. But life on the internet isn't always this innocent. What other worlds will this technology lead us into? Author Douglas Rushkoff thinks it's inevitable that the new freedom to communicate will lead us into darker areas of cyberspace.
The internet is a form of cultural intimacy. People are speaking to each other in ways they hadn't spoken to people before. They're sharing their opinions. It's very much like when you get in the United States, you get to junior high school, and you finally can talk to other kids about what's going on, and you talk in the locker room about certain things and in the bathroom about certain things. It's new intimacy, new conversation, and it feels almost a little naughty. And once you feel like you've been let to your own devices, you immediately think of sex and drugs and rock and roll and making weapons and all those naughty things. So I think a lot of the reason why there's so much thought about the internet as sexy or as a sexual conduit, or about teledildonics, where you'll hook your genitals up to some kind of a device and masturbate yourself into oblivion while someone else types love notes to you, is only because, one, we're a sexually frustrated culture, and two, because any time you have a new window of intimacy in your life, you're going to think about how to use it for sex. It's one of the first drives. It's exciting.
Sex in cyberspace is a hot issue. Inevitably, porn is one of the most popular uses of the internet. There's a huge range of sex discussion groups. You can get all of it in other ways, but the fact that it's on the net and available to anybody is a sensor's nightmare. But is there any way to control the net? And should we even try? What overshadows the censorship issue is the huge commercial value of an uncensored internet. Governments may try to find clever ways to ban pornography, but there may never be a foolproof way of keeping it hidden. Sex is what is really selling cyberspace.
A great deal of this is really about money. It's not necessarily about community, it's not about the imagination, it's not about empowerment, it's not about democracy. It's not necessarily about any of these things. What it definitely is about is a potential $3.5 trillion payday. It's worth sort of underscoring, $1 trillion payday. When you have that much money on the line, it creates a kind of a vacuum, and people are going to be drawn into it, and you're going to find yourself buying into stuff that you either don't need or don't require, or that in some cases may be downright dangerous and detrimental. That's the real issue here. There are positive aspects to it, but you can never entirely separate them off from the digital hype.
For most of us, art is static and usually hangs on a wall in a gallery. But the new Electroculture offers many other kinds of art, moving, dynamic, and interactive.
The work that I produce is loosely called organic art. This is ironic in the sense that everything that we create is in computer space, and it's not organic in any sense, it's extremely artificial. So, as an artist, in some sense I operate like God, creating a virtual world, inventing the rules of life, death, artificial physics and things like that. And having created this world, the artist becomes like a gardener operating within it, deciding which life forms survive and which ones don't. And the criteria for survival in this artificial world is survival of the most aesthetic.
Latham and his team now produce works which for him deal with some contemporary issues.
The themes that we are dealing with in our work
make people feel quite uncomfortable, in particular kind of parodies of genetic engineering, comments on man's relationship and manipulation of the natural world. And quite a lot of what we talk about is actually science, things that are happening on modern day farming, things like that. So the work does actually often make people feel quite uncomfortable, particularly some of the forms that look like embryos and eggs and things like that. But really, I feel that that's really what art should be talking about now, because this is really extremely important, what's happening in scientific laboratories. And art, in its best sense, mirrors what's happening in society.
Latham's latest venture is to publish a CD-ROM, giving the public the chance to make organic patterns on their own computer screen.
Organic art comes on a CD-ROM, and you stick this CD-ROM in your PC, and it comes up with a menu like this. And there are a number of options which you as the artist, the public as the artist, can select and control. For example, there are a number of preset scenes, organic scenes that you can pick, and clicking on it, we instantly get an organic form growing on the screen. What organic art does, it allows the layman to create computer art for themselves. Very quickly, they can be building very complex organic structures that in the past would have been purely created by software. I think in many ways, genetic art is a bit like when pop music first came into being. And people in the classical world feel very uncomfortable with pop music. And I think it's very similar. Computer art makes people in the traditional art world feel very uncomfortable because it is very new and it has its own rules. And I think really computer art, in some ways, could actually liberate modern art and actually take it and push it in a new direction. Maybe people in the art world are aware of this and are kind of nervous about this because computer art doesn't rely on the traditional dealer world. It doesn't rely on the Tate Gallery. It doesn't rely on any conventional exhibiting spaces. It has its own hierarchy, its own way of doing business. And in some ways, it is like a kind of mini revolution, if you like, in cultural terms. I operate in a kind of subculture. There is a sort of subcultural world of people who are using internet, fascinated by computers. And that's very different to the sort of typical gallery-going type of person. And so I'm appealing to a different audience. And in some ways, there is something slightly revolutionary about this, that one is overthrowing this older establishment. What's more interesting and more to do with the 20th century is art that relates to software. Software is what controls the world that we live in.
As art meets software, it's become part of a brand new market. Museums like Britain's National Gallery are now selling digital rights to reproduce their works to people like Microsoft's Bill Gates. But will looking at art on a computer change the way we think about painting?
Painting is a medium which was highly influential at one time, but which you could say is now becoming more marginalized. Nevertheless, it still plays a significant aesthetic role. But I think that the animated image, and above all, the interactive image, will become increasingly important. And perhaps will become the major art form of the 21st century, which in turn will be determined by the creators of virtual worlds.
Paintings are changing, and traditional institutions are changing with them. Here in a Berlin gallery, they're experimenting with new forms of interactive art. This painting is actually a computer screen pretending to be a conventional painting. A hidden camera peers at the observer, scanning his eye movements, and a computer repaints the picture as the viewer's eye moves from one area to another. Is all this technology bringing anything of value to the arts? Are the conventional arts finished forever?
I think you have to be very wary when you hear people claiming that the arrival of a particular new technology will transform everything. For example, when writing was invented, we didn't stop talking to each other. And when the telephone was invented, we didn't stop meeting each other in the flesh. So we are not necessarily saying that everything will change. That's the first thing I'd like to point out. I want to make it clear that there isn't going to be a simple substitution of the virtual for the real. I'm sure that books will always exist as something physical. They'll never disappear altogether, although their use will decline. But it's a very different story for writing. Writing and reading is growing enormously because of all the text on our computer screens, whether from CD-ROMs or through all the written information on the internet and the World Wide Web. So you could say that, far from being at the end of a civilization of reading and writing, we are perhaps at the beginning of an extraordinary rise in the culture of the word.
Cyberspace seems to be making us into text junkies. This CD-ROM holds the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, 32 volumes, 44 million words. But does all this computerized information actually help you appreciate art? Playing with paintings on CD-ROM may make art less intimidating, but what real insights does this new electronic cut-and-paste culture provide? Online art galleries, interactive medieval manuscripts, old culture and new clothes. It may now all be available on computer, but is that enough to keep it alive? Maybe what the new electroculture needs is its own art with some new ideas.
Human thought reached a plateau with the Athenian Greeks, as far as I could see, in literature, art, every field of human effort. And since then, it's just been up and down, to such an extent that the humanists say there's nothing new under the sun and nothing ever changes. What they're really saying is, we haven't gotten any good ideas since the time of the Greeks. And I think that was true in almost all fields except mathematics and computer science. In physics, there were some new ideas, maybe hundreds of them. But when a friend of yours is doing something mysterious with a computer, he's probably using an idea no one's ever had before. And so to me, it's not just another gadget, but it's the richest thing that's happened to us in at least 2,000 years.
The computer has played a bigger part in music making than perhaps any other art form over the past 30 years. At New York's bastion of high culture, the Lincoln Center, a new work is about to be performed with the help of the audience and several computers.
This is where I went to school. And of course, when I was here 20 years ago, I was steeped in the middle of the classical music tradition and the idea of writing music on music paper and having music be a very internal activity. And a very the idea then was the great man theory, where I was trained as a composer, and I would write this piece at home and give it to the orchestra, and the audience would sit there and passively listen and then say how great it was. One of the statements we're trying to make is that one way to revitalize music and make it as exciting and visceral as it should be is to say that you don't have to be trained at Juilliard, you don't have to be Beethoven to have an active relationship to music. You don't have to play piano for 20 years. Music is serious business, but there are ways of being serious and deeply involved with it without being a professional musician, and this is one way of doing it.
This is not a games arcade. It's the lobby of the concert hall, where the audience can play what the composer calls hyper instruments.
One major goal has been to provide a large-scale artistic work that has many aspects of it designed and prepared ahead of time, but many significant aspects of it that are not only variable from performance to performance, but are modifiable, changeable, and actually created by the audience themselves. So it has three parts to it. One part is a kind of musical theme park. We call it the interactive lobby, where a variety of musical experiences, hyper instruments, are set up for the public to experiment with, play with. Some of them are involved with shaping and changing music. Some of them involve using the speaking or singing voice. All of them take snippets and fragments from what the audience produces when they come to this lobby and incorporate it into performances.
The work began months earlier at the Media Lab near Boston with the invention of the instruments themselves.
So this is called a sensor chair, and it's an instrument designed to give fun musical performance and expression that can be played basically by anybody who likes music. You don't have to be an expert performer, although it does take skill. The way it works is I'm sitting on a chair that has a piece of metal on the seat. When I sit on that, my body starts emitting electricity almost like an antenna. And each of these 4 canisters, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus these 2 things under my feet are actually sensors, and they're measuring how much electricity is coming out of my body. So when I move my hand here, for instance, you can see it light up. The computer then turns this all into a kind of active surface, so anywhere I move when I'm sitting in the chair is measured by the instrument. And since it's really a virtual instrument, not only is it easy to play, but I can change the music it makes. So by just pushing one of the pedals with my feet, I now have a completely different instrument. Now, if I lean back like this, it does nothing. I can make it louder. I can make it higher, lower. I can change the color of the sound, like that. And
The artists and scientists in this program are like explorers of a new world, or perhaps more like excited kids in a toy shop. For many people, the medium is still louder than the artistic message it's producing. But for these pioneers and evangelists of cyberspace, it's a world of infinite possibilities.
In many ways, the computer screen is a bit like Alice through the looking glass. It's a kind of an imaginary world. Once you pass through this plane, it's a place that is created by the human mind. Like all software is, after all, created by humans. And it can be as surreal or as real as you like. And I think man has perhaps realized that we can't go very far into outer space. You know, our space rockets can't get very far before they run out of fuel. But within computer space, it's an infinite world. And so it's sort of, instead of going out into space, we're going into inner space. And there's a world of possibilities that exist the other side of the computer screen.
This will only work if all of us do all we can to push it as far forward as possible. Then the people who come after us will stand on our shoulders and they'll push it as far forward as possible. This sense of trying to create value and build the new structures together to create this new world, it seems to me is something that needs to be a very dominant theme, because it could go terribly wrong, and there will be areas where it will go terribly wrong, and it will be down to us to use these new tools in ways that create a wonderful new environment.
However we use it, and whatever we use it for, the technology can begin to release our own imagination. But in these electronic oceans of cyberspace, it's staying human that matters most.